The water in the Maldives wasn't just blue. It was a shimmering tapestry of turquoise and sapphire, so clear you could see the white sand 30 feet below. From the deck of his private overwater bungalow at the Serafina Resort, Conrad Beaumont felt like a king surveying his kingdom. Beside him, the beautiful Kira Jensen laughed, her hand resting on her barely there baby bump. This was it, the perfect escape, a Babymoon for the child he believed would complete his perfect life. But 8,000 miles away, his 9 months pregnant wife Lorraine wasn't packing a hospital bag. She was systematically dismantling his empire, one phone call at a time. Conrad's paradise was about to become his prison, and the first clang of the bars shutting was the quiet, humiliating sound of a credit card being declined. Conrad Beaumont didn't just live the American dream. He'd coded it, monetized it, and sold the IPO. His company Nexus Pay had revolutionized the fintech world, turning him from a caffeine-fueled coder in a garage into a titan of industry before his 35th birthday. His life was a carefully curated collection of success symbols, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, a garage filled with cars that whispered of power rather than shouted, and a beautiful, intelligent wife, Lorraine Davenport. Lorraine was no mere socialite. She was a Davenport, a name that carried the quiet weight of old money and legal prowess. With a law degree from Yale and a mind as sharp as a shard of glass, she had been Nexus Pay's first general counsel. She was the architect of its ironclad legal structure, the silent partner who had secured the fortress while Conrad led the charge. They had been a team, an unstoppable force. But 3 years ago, after a difficult journey with fertility treatments, Lorraine had stepped back. Her new project, the one that mattered most, was growing inside her, their son. In the final weeks of her pregnancy, a subtle chill had crept into their opulent home. Conrad, once doting and present, became a ghost in his own life. "It's the pressure of the Q4 report," he'd say, kissing her forehead, before disappearing back to the office for another late night. "Just securing our boy's future, darling." Lorraine, swollen and exhausted, wanted to believe him, but she hadn't gotten where she was by being naive. She noticed the small things. The second phone that was always silenced and face down. The scent of a perfume, a light floral scent, nothing like her own sandalwood and vanilla, that clung faintly to his shirts. The way his eyes would glaze over when she talked about Lamar's classes, his mind clearly a million miles away. The lie that broke the dam was a simple one. "I have to fly to Singapore," he announced one evening, meticulously folding a brand-new linen shirt into his suitcase. "A surprise summit with our Asian market investors. It's last minute a real pain, but it's $1 billion deal. I'll be back in 5 days, long before the little guy decides to make his debut." He looked her in the eye as he said it. The sincerity in his gaze was so polished, so practiced, it was almost perfect. Almost. Lorraine smiled, a placid, gentle expression that betrayed none of the acid churning in her stomach. "Of course, my love. Be safe. Close that deal for our family." As soon as the penthouse door clicked shut, her serene mask crumbled. She moved with a purpose that defied her heavy belly, heading straight for his home office. She wasn't looking for texts or emails. That was amateur hour. Conrad was a tech genius. His digital security was flawless. But his weakness, she knew, was his ego. And his ego was serviced by one thing above all else: luxury retail. She logged into the shared family account for their concierge service, a high-end firm that handled everything from private jet bookings to sourcing rare watches. She scrolled through the recent activity. A dinner reservation for two at a place he'd told her was booked solid for months. A purchase from a high-end baby boutique in Soho, strange, since they had a fully stocked nursery. But it was the last item that made the air leave her lungs in a silent scream. A charge from Boucheron and Fields, their private jeweler. The work order attached as a PDF for their records was for a custom-made charm bracelet. It was a push present, a gift for a new mother. But the details were horrifyingly specific. A platinum band with 3 charms, a miniature globe, a tiny, intricately detailed seaplane, and a small engraved disc. Lorraine zoomed in on the jeweler's digital mock-up. The engraving on the disc read, "For KJ, our adventure begins. Love. See, KJ." The initials hit her like a physical blow. Kira Jensen, a bright, ambitious marketing associate from Nexus Pay. 26 years old, raven-haired with the kind of hungry look in her eyes that Lorraine recognized because she used to have it herself. Lorraine had seen the way Conrad's gaze lingered on Kira during the last company gala. A fleeting moment, but she had filed it away, a splinter of unease in the back of her mind. The globe, the seaplane. It wasn't Singapore. It was a destination, a private romantic trip. The baby boutique. The push present. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Kira Jensen was pregnant too. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal of a magnitude she could barely comprehend. He was building a second life, a mirror image of their own, with a younger model. For a long moment, Lorraine simply stood there, in the silent, cavernous office, the glow of the monitor illuminating the tears that now streamed down her face. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. She felt the baby kick, a strong, insistent reminder of the life she was carrying, the family she thought she was building. And in that moment, the grief began to cool. It hardened, solidifying into something else. Something cold sharp and diamond hard. Rage. She was Lorraine Davenport. Her name meant something. Her father hadn't raised a victim. Conrad had mistaken her love for weakness. He had mistaken her pregnancy for incapacitation. He had forgotten who he had married. He had forgotten that the woman who built the legal walls of his fortress knew exactly where all the back doors were. He wanted a Babymoon. She would give him a trip he would never, ever forget. She picked up her phone, her hand steady, her mind whirring with cold, calculated precision. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to her father. "Dad," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "I need you to make a few calls for me. We need to liquidate some private assets and move them. Quietly. And I need the name of the best international banking security consultant you know. Conrad's on a trip. I want to make sure he has a memorable one." Arthur Davenport was a man who moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a fight he cared about. Retired from the helm of a white shoe law firm that bore his name, he now spent his days managing his vast estate in Connecticut, but his mind had lost none of its predatory sharpness. When he heard his daughter's voice on the phone, flat, controlled, yet humming with a terrifying undertone, he knew this was not a social call. He listened without interruption for 10 minutes as Lorraine laid out the situation. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. Arthur Davenport dealt in strategy, not sympathy. When she was finished, there was a brief pause. "The fool," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "He flew too close to the sun with another man's wings. Your wings, Lorraine. What is your objective?" "I want him crippled, Dad," she replied, the words tasting like metal in her mouth. "Not ruined. Ruin is messy and takes years. I want him isolated and powerless. I want him to understand what it feels like to have the world you built dissolve into thin air. The money, the access, the identity. All of it. Gone. A laudable goal, Arthur said, a hint of pride in his tone. Strategic, not emotional. Good. Here is what we will do. For the next 48 hours, Lorraine's penthouse became a war room. Arthur drove in from Connecticut, bringing with him a man named Peterson, a former MI6 agent who now ran a discreet private security firm in London, specializing in asset protection and recovery. Peterson was a pale, unassuming man in a rumpled suit who looked more like an accountant than a spy, but his eyes missed nothing. Together, the three of them mapped out Conrad Beaumont's entire financial and legal existence. Lorraine, as the co-signer on nearly every account and the architect of their family trust, held more power than Conrad had ever bothered to remember. The primary accounts are joint tenancy, Lorraine explained, pointing to a flowchart she'd drawn on a whiteboard. Nexus Pay stock brokerage accounts are main checking. He thinks that gives him equal access. But the family trust, which holds the bulk of our liquid assets, names me as the primary trustee with full discretionary power in the event of spousal incapacitation or malfeasance. I wrote that clause myself. Arthur permitted himself a small, wolfish grin. Malfeasance. A beautiful, wonderfully vague word. An affair with a pregnant employee, while you're 9 months pregnant yourself, I believe that qualifies. Peterson nodded. The offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland are in his name only. Those will be harder to touch directly. We don't need to touch them, Lorraine countered. We just need to cut off his access to them. His passport. Conrad Beaumont, the global jet-setter, is nothing without it. Peterson leaned forward. You can't legally have a citizen's passport cancelled without cause. Of course not, Lorraine said, her voice cold. But a wife deeply concerned for her husband's increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior can certainly report his passport as lost or potentially stolen to the State Department. She can file a police report stating that in a fit of rage, he stormed out of the house taking his documents, and she hasn't been able to reach him since. She fears for his mental state and for what he might do. Such a report would trigger a flag in the international database. It wouldn't invalidate the passport immediately, but it would prevent him from boarding any commercial flight or crossing any border until the flag is cleared, a process that can take weeks. Arthur looked at his daughter with newfound respect. This was his blood, his legacy of strategic warfare, refined and weaponized. The plan was executed with military precision. Phase 1. Financial strangulation. On Monday morning, Lorraine, armed with a power of attorney Arthur had drafted years ago, visited their private banker at J.P. Morgan Chase. She calmly explained that due to a serious family emergency and concerns over Conrad's mental stability, she was invoking her rights as trustee. Within an hour, billions of dollars in assets were moved from their joint accounts into a new trust in her name only. The funds in the Cayman and Swiss accounts remained, but they were now islands unreachable without the passwords and security fobs that were sitting in a safe in their New York apartment. Next, she called the concierge at American Express. She was the primary holder of their coveted Centurion card, the mythical black card. Conrad's was a supplementary card. "I'm reporting my husband's card as stolen," she said, her voice laced with practiced distress. "His wallet was taken. Please cancel it immediately and flag all charges." She did the same for their Visa and MasterCard accounts. In the space of 3 hours, Conrad Beaumont's wallet, filled with plastic that could buy a skyscraper, became utterly useless. Phase 2. Digital isolation. Peterson handled the next part. He used a contact within a telecom provider to have Conrad's primary US cell number suspended, citing a security breach. His secondary burner phone would still work, but it was a prepaid device with a limited data plan. More importantly, it wasn't linked to any of his banking or security apps. Without his primary number, he couldn't receive the two-factor authentication codes needed to access his online banking, his crypto wallets, or even his corporate email. He was digitally castrated. Phase 3. The narrative. This was Lorraine's masterstroke. She didn't want Conrad to look like a cheating husband. She wanted him to look like a man who had lost his mind. It was a more effective way to neutralize him and garner sympathy. She sent a carefully worded email to the board of Nexus Pay and a few key trusted friends. Subject: personal update and request for discretion. Dear all, I'm writing to you with a heavy heart. As many of you know, Conrad has been under immense pressure lately. I'm afraid the stress has taken a severe toll on his mental health. He has become erratic and paranoid, and against my and his doctor's advice, he has left the country without notice. I am unable to reach him, and I am deeply concerned for his well-being. I am working with the relevant authorities to ensure his safety. In the meantime, I ask that you respect our family's privacy and direct all urgent Nexus Pay business to the COO. Please, if he contacts you, urge him to come home and get the help he so desperately needs. It was a work of art. It painted her as the worried, loyal wife and him as a tragic figure, not a villain. It sowed doubt and confusion, ensuring that if he did manage to call anyone for help, they would meet his pleas with suspicion and pity, not a lifeline. By Tuesday afternoon, the trap was set. Lorraine sat in her silent penthouse, looking out over the city. She felt a profound and terrible emptiness, but also a surge of power she hadn't felt in years. She had built an empire with him. Now she had taken it back. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away, Conrad Beaumont was ordering another bottle of champagne, utterly oblivious that his kingdom had already fallen. The Serafina resort in the Maldives was less a hotel and more a private universe of indulgence. Each overwater bungalow was a self-contained estate, complete with a private infinity pool, a personal butler, and a glass floor in the living room for watching the kaleidoscopic marine life glide by. For 3 days, Conrad and Kira lived in a sun-drenched fantasy. They snorkeled with sea turtles, had massages on a secluded sandbank, and dined under the stars, their feet in the warm sand. Conrad felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, away from the pressures of New York, away from the impending reality of fatherhood with Lorraine, a reality that had begun to feel more like a business merger than a loving partnership. He felt free. Kira, for her part, was playing the role of a lifetime. She was effusively grateful, endlessly adoring. She would gaze at him with worshipful eyes, telling him how powerful, how brilliant he was. She talked excitedly about their baby, a girl, she hoped. They would raise her between New York and maybe a house in the Hamptons. It was the exact fantasy Conrad wanted to hear. "You know," he said to her on their 3rd night, swirling a ridiculously expensive burgundy in his glass, "Lorraine just doesn't get this. She'd be analyzing the resort's profit margins. You just enjoy it. You live in the moment. It's easy to live in the moment when the moment is perfect," Kira cooed, leaning in to kiss him. The fantasy shattered the next evening at Azure, the resort's signature underwater restaurant. They were seated at the best table, surrounded by curved glass walls that gave them a 180-degree view of a coral reef teeming with life. It was breathtaking. The bill arrived in a small mother-of-pearl box. It was even for Conrad an eye-watering sum. He handed the waiter his Amex Centurion card without a second thought. The waiter, a polite man named Faris, returned a few minutes later, his expression apologetic. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Beaumont. The card has been declined." Conrad frowned. "Declined? That's not possible." "Run it again." Faris bowed slightly. "I have, sir. 3 times. The system says to contact the issuer." A flicker of annoyance. "Fine." Conrad pulled out his JP Morgan Reserve Visa. "Use this one." Faris returned again, his face now etched with discomfort. "My apologies again, sir. This one as well. And the MasterCard." Conrad's annoyance curdled into confusion. He could feel Kira's gaze on him, her perfect smile faltering. "This is ridiculous." He snapped his voice louder than he intended. Several diners turned to look. "There must be a problem with your system." "Perhaps, sir," Faris said smoothly, though his eyes told a different story. "If you would be so kind as to speak with our resort manager, Mr. Hassan, he can assist you in his office." The walk from the underwater restaurant to the manager's office was the longest of Conrad's life. The hushed whispers of the other guests followed him like a trail of smoke. Kira trailed behind him, her silence a heavy weight. Mr. Hassan was a distinguished man, with silvering hair and an impeccably tailored suit. His office was a sanctuary of calm with mahogany furniture and views of a tranquil lagoon. His demeanor, however, was all business. "Mr. Beaumont," he began, his tone courteous but firm. "We have a slight issue. Not only was your card declined for tonight's dinner, but the pre-authorization we took on your Centurion card at check-in has also been revoked by the bank. As it stands, your entire stay, including the seaplane transfer, is currently unpaid." Conrad stared at him dumbfounded. "That's impossible. There are millions of dollars in those accounts." "That may be, but we are unable to access them," Mr. Hassan replied. "Do you have another form of payment? A wire transfer, perhaps?" Conrad pulled out his phone. He would fix this. A simple call to his private banker. He dialed the number, but it wouldn't connect. Call failed. He tried again. Nothing. He checked the signal. Full bars. He tried to open his banking app. Authentication required. "A code has been sent to your registered mobile number." He waited. No code arrived. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into his veins. He tried to log into his Nexus Pay email. Password incorrect. He knew it was the right password. He tried the forgot password link. Recovery instructions sent to your primary contact email and phone number. His primary contact email was a private account he couldn't access, and the phone number was the one that was now mysteriously dead. He was locked out. He was completely and utterly locked out of his own life. "Kira," he said, his voice strained. "Give me your card. I'll pay you back." Kira looked at him, her eyes wide with a dawning panic. She was a marketing associate. Her credit card had a $10,000 limit. The bill for their stay was already approaching 6 figures. "Conrad, I can't cover this." Mr. Hassan cleared his throat. "Mr. Beaumont, our policy in these situations is quite clear. We will of course provide you with basic accommodation and meals. However, all non-essential services will be suspended. Your access to the spa, the fine dining restaurants, and the water sports facilities will be revoked. We will hold your luggage and passports as collateral until the bill, which currently stands at $112,450, is settled in full." Conrad felt the blood drain from his face. His passport. They had his passport. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, the words feeling hollow even to him. "My wife. She must have. I need to call New York." Mr. Hassan offered him the use of his landline. Conrad frantically dialed his assistant, his friends, board members, anyone he could think of. The responses were all unnervingly similar, his assistant sounding flustered. "Conrad. Oh my God, are you okay? Lorraine told us you were having some kind of breakdown. We've all been so worried." A board member, his voice thick with false concern. "Conrad, my boy, just come home. Whatever it is, we can get you the help you need. Don't worry about the company, we'll handle things." No one would help him. Lorraine's narrative had reached them first. He wasn't a man in trouble. He was a man who was unwell. A liability. He finally hung up the phone, his hand trembling. He was stranded on a tiny speck of land in the middle of the Indian Ocean. He had no money, no working phone, no way to access his empire, and no way to leave. The beautiful turquoise water outside the window suddenly looked like the walls of a very luxurious, very expensive prison. He turned to look at Kira. The adoration in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else, fear and a cold, calculating assessment. The fantasy was over. Welcome to hell. The walk from the sun-drenched perfection of the resort's guest area to the functional hidden-away staff quarters was a journey across a social chasm. Led by two silent security guards, Conrad and Kira traversed a path he never knew existed, leaving behind the manicured gardens and infinity pools for a world of concrete walkways, humming generators, and the steamy industrial scent of the laundry facility. It was the resort's engine room, a place of work and function, never meant to be seen by the gilded class of guests. Their new room was a sterile box. Two narrow twin beds with thin starched sheets were pushed against opposite walls. A small barred window offered not a vista of the turquoise ocean, but a close-up view of a massive, perpetually spinning exhaust fan. The air was thick with humidity and the faint smell of bleach. As the heavy door clicked shut behind the guards, the finality of their situation settled with the suffocating weight of a physical blow. The paradise they had inhabited was a stage set, and they had just been unceremoniously shoved backstage. For the first 24 hours, Conrad vibrated with a furious, impotent energy. He paced the 4 short steps from the door to the window, and back a caged predator stripped of his teeth and claws. He would grab his dead phone and glare at the black screen, as if his sheer force of will could resurrect it. His mind, accustomed to solving complex code and navigating billion-dollar deals, could not process this simple, absolute powerlessness. "This is a kidnapping," he roared at Mr. Hassan during one of several fruitless visits to the manager's office. "It's illegal. I'll have your job. I will buy this entire God-forsaken island and turn it into a parking lot." Mr. Hassan, immaculate in his linen suit, simply listened with the patience of a man who had seen every form of wealthy hubris imaginable. "As soon as your bill is settled, Mr. Beaumont, you are free to go," he would reply, his voice a maddening oasis of calm. "Until then, our policy is firm." Kira watched this display with a growing sense of dread. The powerful magnetic CEO, she had idolized, the man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, was gone. In his place was this red-faced shouting man, flailing against a wall of polite, immovable bureaucracy. The fantasy she had so carefully constructed, the life of effortless luxury, the ascension into New York's elite, the security she craved, was crumbling into dust. Her admiration, once the bedrock of their affair, was eroding with every failed threat he uttered, replaced by a cold, creeping contempt. He wasn't a king. He was a fool who had lost his crown, and he had dragged her down with him. By the second day, the silence between them in the small room had become a weapon. It was thick with unspoken accusations. His blame, her resentment. Finally it broke. "What is your plan, Conrad?" Kira asked, her voice tight and brittle. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Because pacing and yelling at the manager isn't working." He whirled on her, his eyes wild. "My plan. I'm trying to fix the mess she made. This is Lorraine. She's lost her mind. It's the pregnancy hormones. They've made her completely irrational. She's crazy." Kira let out a short, bitter laugh. "Crazy. Or the only sane one among us. She seems to have thought of everything with remarkable clarity. And don't you dare hide behind her pregnancy. You lied to a 9 months pregnant woman, Conrad. You lied to her face, then ran off with your younger, also pregnant mistress to a tropical paradise. What did you think was going to happen? Did you truly believe that Lorraine Davenport, the legal eagle who helped build your entire company, would just sit at home and knit booties?" The raw truth of her words was like a slap. He had been arrogant. He had seen Lorraine's pregnancy as a state of weakness, a distraction that would allow him to operate with impunity. He had forgotten the formidable intellect he had once so admired. "It was all going to be handled," he shot back, his voice defensive. "The divorce was going to be amicable. I was protecting her." "Protecting her?" Kira stood up, her eyes flashing with a fury that mirrored his own. "By humiliating her on a global scale, you weren't protecting her. You were protecting yourself from a difficult conversation. And what about me? You told me it was over between you two. You sold me a future that was apparently built on a foundation of lies. And what about your future?" he sneered, lashing out. "You think I don't know what this was about? You saw a ticket to the top and you took it. And what's wrong with that?" She screamed, tears of rage and self-pity welling in her eyes. "Isn't that how your world works? Everyone taking what they can. I've given years of my life to Nexus pay, working twice as hard for half the recognition. You promised me a promotion, a real seat at the table. Now my career is over. When this gets out, I'm not just the other woman. I'm the idiot who got stranded on a desert island with the CEO when his wife cut him off. I'm a punchline. Your career," he scoffed, the sound dripping with disdain. "I'm facing total catastrophic ruin. She is trying to steal my company." "It was her company too," Kira retorted. "And you were willing to risk it all for this. For us." The argument hung in the air, ugly and unresolved. The us that had felt so special and thrilling under the Maldivian sun was now revealed for what it was, a toxic cocktail of his ego and her ambition. Finally, on the third day, after dozens of failed calls, Conrad managed to get a line out to David Chen, his COO, and a man he'd considered one of his closest friends. The relief that flooded him upon hearing David's voice was immediate and overwhelming. "David, thank God, it's Conrad. Listen, I'm in serious trouble." He launched into a frantic, garbled explanation, the Maldives, the frozen accounts, Lorraine's episode. David's response was not the one he expected. There was no, "What can I do to help?" Instead, his voice was cautious, laced with a patronizing sympathy that made Conrad's skin crawl. "Whoa, Conrad, mate, just slow down. Take a breath. Lorraine called us. She told us you were under a lot of strain, that you'd snapped. We've all been so worried about you, man." "Worried, David, it's a lie. She's locked me out of everything." "Okay, pal, okay. Just focus on getting some rest. Don't worry about the company we're handling things here. The most important thing is for you to come home and get the help you need." Get the help you need? The phrase echoed in Conrad's ear. It was the masterstroke. Lorraine hadn't painted him as a villain. She'd painted him as a tragic, unstable figure. No one would wire money to a man having a mental breakdown. No one would take his side against his worried, pregnant wife. She hadn't just built a cage. She had convinced all his allies that it was a sanctuary for his own good. Desperation clawed at him. There was only one person who could undo this. He sent a pleading message through David, a final, desperate gambit. "Tell her I need to talk to her. It's about the baby, our son." He hated himself for using his unborn child as bait, but he was out of moves. He spent hours waiting by the phone in Mr. Hassan's office, a supplicant under the manager's watchful gaze. Finally, it rang. "Lorraine." He breathed his voice, a ragged mix of hope and dread. The voice that came back was as clear and cold as glacial ice. "Conrad." "Laurie, thank God. Listen, there's been a terrible, insane mistake. You've cut everything off. I'm trapped here. You have to call the banks. You have to fix this." "There's no mistake, Conrad," she replied, each word a perfectly polished stone. "This is not an error. This is a consequence." The word hung in the air between them. A consequence for what? A little trip. This is disproportionate. "Lorraine, it's insane." "No," she said. And he heard the shift in her voice from cold to dangerously sharp. "I have finally found my sense of proportion. You are in the Maldives with your pregnant mistress on what you have the audacity to call a babymoon, while I am days away from giving birth to our son. You stood in our home, looked me in the eye, and you lied. You didn't just underestimate my intelligence, Conrad. You underestimated my worth." "It's complicated." He stammered the words feeble, even to his own ears. "It's remarkably simple." She cut him off, her voice like steel. "You made a series of choices, and now I am making mine. Our financial empire was built on a foundation of mutual trust. You dynamited that foundation, so I have restructured our assets to protect myself, and more importantly, to protect my child's future." "Your child," he sputtered, indignation rising. "He's my son too, and those are my assets." A dead silence stretched over the line, a void of terrifying length. When she spoke again, her voice was low, almost conversational, and infinitely more menacing. "You should be more concerned about your immediate problems. Your hotel bill, for instance, and your passport. I was so worried when you stormed out that I felt compelled to report it stolen. Clearing that up from a foreign country with no money might be challenging." He felt the last of his strength drain away, leaving him hollow. She had anticipated everything. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was an execution. "Lorraine, please," he begged, all pretense of anger gone, replaced by pure animal fear. "Don't do this." "It's already done," she said softly. Then she twisted the knife. "By the way, Conrad, my father's security consultant, a very thorough man, did a little digging into your KJ. He thought it prudent to check her network activity at Nexus Pay. It seems your girlfriend has been quite busy." Conrad's blood ran cold. He glanced over at Kira, who was watching him from the doorway of the office, her face pale. "For the last 6 months," Lorraine continued, her voice as dispassionate as a newsreader's, "she has been downloading proprietary source code, sensitive investor data, and our 5-year strategic plan. She's been sending it all to a shell account that my consultant traced back quite easily, I might add, to a venture capital firm. A firm run by Richard Kessler." Kessler, his nemesis, the rival who had been trying to gut his company for years. The name landed like a physical blow. Lorraine let the silence stretch, allowing the full implication to sink in. So you see, Conrad, your affair wasn't just a personal humiliation for me. You brought a corporate spy into our lives. You gave her access that compromised our entire company, the company that I am still a major shareholder in. She paused, then delivered the killing blow. The board will be very interested to hear about this. I imagine they'll have some questions for you, if you ever make it back. The line clicked dead. Conrad stood frozen, the silent receiver pressed to his ear. He was no longer just a cheating husband. He was a fool, a dupe, the architect of his own company's potential destruction, and the woman he had discarded had just become his judge, his jury, and his executioner. The silence that followed the dead phone line was more profound than any sound Conrad had ever heard. It was a vacuum pulling all the air, all the heat, all the arrogance from the room. He slowly, mechanically placed the receiver back into its cradle. The small plastic click echoed like a gunshot in his mind, the sound of a door slamming shut on his entire existence. He was staring into the abyss, and the abyss had a name: Lorraine. But as he turned his head, his gaze fell upon Kira Jensen, and he realized the abyss had multiple flaws. Lorraine's betrayal was a masterpiece of strategic warfare, an act of such cold, calculated brilliance that a part of him, even in his ruin, could almost admire it. It was a response to his own actions. But Kira's betrayal was of a different sort. It was parasitic. She hadn't just cheated on him. She had used him as a host, a tool, a stepping stone in a grubby little game of corporate espionage. He had handed her the keys to his kingdom, and she had been systematically selling off the crown jewels. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. The doe-eyed adoration was gone, replaced by the raw, feral terror of a cornered animal. The curve of her belly, which he had once seen as a symbol of their secret, exciting future, now looked like a cancerous growth, a monument to his own spectacular stupidity. You, he whispered the word, a plume of toxic smoke. He felt no rage, only a vast, glacial emptiness. The whole time, every word, every touch, it was all a lie. Kira flinched, scrambling backward until her back hit the wall. The tears that streamed down her face were real now, born not of manipulation, but of pure panic. I had to. She sobbed the words, tumbling out in a desperate, pathetic rush. Richard Kessler. He promised me everything. He said you were a dinosaur, that Nexus Pay was a sinking ship. He promised me a senior position, a real future security. Security. Conrad's laugh started as a low tremor and erupted into a full-blown, unhinged cackle. It was the sound of a man breaking apart at the seams. Security. By committing federal crimes, by selling proprietary code, you absolute fool. You haven't secured a future. You've secured a federal indictment. You're finished. We're both finished. Mr. Hassan, who had stood by with the impassive professionalism of a mortician, finally stepped forward. He had overheard every word, his expression unchanging. Ms. Jensen, he stated, his voice as calm and unyielding as the tide. Given this new information and the fact that you are an accomplice in Mr. Beaumont's financial predicament at our resort, I'm afraid your position here is also untenable. Both of your passports will remain in our custody, pending further instructions. The shared prison cell of their staff quarters room became a new circle of hell. The air, already thick with the scent of industrial detergent from the nearby laundry, now crackled with silent loathing. They moved around each other like hostile ghosts in the cramped space, the memory of their intimacy a source of revulsion. Conrad would lie awake on his lumpy mattress, listening to the rhythmic churning of the giant washing machines, the sound a metronome counting down the seconds of his failure. He replayed every conversation, every flirtatious email, every late-night rendezvous with Kira, searching for the signs he had so blissfully ignored. They were all there, hiding in plain sight. He hadn't been seduced. He had been targeted. After 2 days marinating in this toxic silence, a sliver of his old self, the problem solver, the man of action, surfaced. He had to do something. He secured permission to use Mr. Hassan's office phone again, the manager watching him with weary resignation. His one remaining hope was the full might of the US government. He dialed the number for the US Embassy in Colombo, Sri Lanka. The faint crackle of the international line sounded like a lifeline. US Embassy Consular Section, how can I help you? The voice was flat, professional, bored. My name is Conrad Beaumont. He began trying to inject authority into his tone. I'm an American citizen, and I am being held against my will in the Maldives. Sir, are you in any physical danger? The officer asked a standard checklist question. No, not physical danger, but they've confiscated my passport. They won't let me leave. A pause. And why have they taken your passport, sir? Conrad's throat tightened. The words were humiliating to say out loud. It's a dispute over a hotel bill. I see, the officer said, and Conrad could practically hear him mentally filing this under rich idiot problems. Sir, that is a civil matter. The embassy cannot interfere in private financial disputes. Our official advice is to settle your bill. I can't. Conrad's voice cracked with desperation. That's the point. My accounts are frozen. My credit cards have been cancelled. My wife... Ah, yes. The officer cut in his voice, now taking on a new, cooler efficiency. We are aware of the situation with your passport, Mr. Beaumont. It has been flagged in the system. A lost or potentially stolen report was filed with the State Department from a precinct in New York City. Yes, that's what I'm telling you. It wasn't lost or stolen. My wife did that maliciously. Sir, that may be. However, until the reporting party officially retracts their report or the flag is cleared through an investigation, we cannot issue you an emergency travel document. The system simply won't allow it. You'll need to work with the reporting party, your wife, it seems, to resolve the issue. Conrad slammed the phone down. It was a perfect, inescapable trap, a bureaucratic Mobius strip designed by Lorraine. He couldn't pay the bill without access to money. He couldn't leave to get access to money without his passport. He couldn't get his passport without clearing the flag. And he couldn't clear the flag without the cooperation of the very person who had put him in this cage. He slumped into the chair, defeated. He was no longer Conrad Beaumont, Titan of Industry. He was case file number 734, a problem to be managed. His deliverance, when it came, was as humbling as his fall. The next afternoon, Mr. Hassan summoned him. The manager's expression was for the first time unreadable. Mr. Beaumont, we received an anonymous wire transfer moments ago for the full outstanding balance of your bill. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated relief shot through Conrad. She was letting him go. She had made her point, and now she was letting him off the hook. Furthermore, Mr. Hassan continued sliding a single sheet of paper across his mahogany desk. A one-way ticket has been booked in your name. It is for a flight from Malé to New York, connecting through Dubai. It departs tomorrow morning at 6:05 a.m. He paused, letting the information sink in. It is an economy class ticket. The relief curdled into shame. This wasn't a reprieve. It was a leash. She was summoning him, but on her terms, stripping him of every last vestige of his former status. Your passport, Mr. Hassan added, will be handed to you by our representative at the check-in counter at Villana International Airport. You will not receive it before then. He looked Conrad squarely in the eye. The arrangements cover you and you alone. Ms. Jensen's situation remains unresolved. The journey home was a 22-hour pilgrimage of shame. At the airport, he was just another face in the swarming, chaotic crowd. He stood in the long, snaking security line, the press of humanity around him, a stark contrast to the sterile solitude of the private terminals he was used to. On the plane, he was wedged into a middle seat in row 42, his knees pressed against the seat in front of him, a crying baby behind him, and a man with a hacking cough beside him. The flight attendant handed him a plastic-wrapped tray of lukewarm chicken and rice, and he ate it because he was starving. Stripped of his phone, his watch, his wallet, he had nothing to do but think. The recycled air and the low drone of the engines became the soundtrack to his internal reckoning. He saw his life with Lorraine not as a marriage, but as a long-term investment she had made, one he had foolishly tried to liquidate. He had seen her intelligence as an asset to his company, but had forgotten it was an integral part of her being, a weapon she could wield with terrifying precision. His anger had evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal fear of the woman he had married. He landed at JFK, looking like a shipwreck survivor. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, his designer suit rumpled and stained. He hailed a yellow cab, the smell of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, an assault on his senses. As the taxi lurched through the familiar streets of Manhattan, everything looked different, as if he were seeing it through a distorted lens. The doorman at his building, a man to whom he had handed a $1,000 bill every Christmas, met his eye with a flicker of recognition, followed by a deep, profound pity that was more insulting than any contempt. The elevator ride up was silent. The penthouse door opening into a cavern of echoes. The place was sterilized. All of Lorraine's personal touches were gone. Her collection of first-edition novels, the abstract art she'd chosen for the foyer, the silver-framed photos of their wedding, their travels, their life. All gone. He walked numbly through the vast space until he reached the nursery. The door was ajar. He pushed it open, and his breath caught in his throat. It was utterly bare. The hand-painted mural of the night sky was gone, painted over in a stark, clinical white. The crib, the changing table, the rocking chair, where he had once imagined himself reading to his son, all had vanished. It was an erasure, a statement that the future he had betrayed would never come to pass. On the cold marble of the kitchen island, stark against the grey stone, lay a single thick manila envelope. His name was typed on the front. His hands, clumsy and trembling, fumbled with the clasp. Inside the papers were cool and heavy. Legal documents. The top one was a petition for divorce citing infidelity and moral turpitude. Beneath that, a temporary restraining order, a legal wall keeping him 500 feet from Lorraine and her father's estate in Connecticut. And under that, a formal notice of an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Nexus Pay, its purpose, stated in cold corporate language, to discuss the immediate removal of CEO Conrad Beaumont for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He felt the floor tilt. Tucked inside the sheaf of divorce papers was one final sheet. It was not a legal document, but a piece of thick cream-colored stationery. Her elegant cursive handwriting was the final precise incision. Conrad. By now you understand. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. I suggest you attend. They are prepared to vote you out of the company you founded, with cause stripping you of your severance and a significant portion of your remaining stock options. They have copies of Kira's emails and a signed affidavit from her, secured by my father's lawyers, in exchange for leniency in her own legal troubles. There is, however, another option. I am exercising my right as a co-founder and major shareholder to take over as interim CEO. If you agree to my terms, a swift, uncontested divorce, a full transfer of the family trust and the New York property to me, and your complete and permanent resignation from Nexus Pay, I will ensure you walk away with a small percentage of your original stock. Enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever hurt anyone on this scale again. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to have your lawyer contact mine with your acceptance. William Arthur Davenport was born 2 days ago. He is healthy and he is beautiful. You will not be a part of his life. He deserves a better role model. Lorraine. The papers slipped from his numb fingers, scattering across the floor like dead leaves. William Arthur Davenport. Her name. Her father's name. His son branded with the sigil of the dynasty that had crushed him. He didn't just sink to the floor. He collapsed the strength, leaving his bones, the world narrowing to a single point of blinding absolute defeat. He was a king with no kingdom, a father with no son, a man with no name, but the one he had disgraced. He was alone in his empty palace, a ghost in the ruins he himself had created. And so Conrad Beaumont's gilded world came crashing down, not with a bang, but with the quiet, calculated click of a woman reclaiming her power. This wasn't just a story of infidelity. It was a masterclass in consequences. Lorraine Davenport proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous when pushed too far. She didn't just get mad. She got strategic. She used the very tools of the empire she helped build to dismantle the king who betrayed her, securing a future for herself and her child, not as a victim, but as a victor. It's a chilling reminder that hell hath no fury, like a brilliant woman scorned. What do you think? Was Lorraine's revenge justified, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, she found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. Messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married, he never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something: her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace, a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did. Lust and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, he feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her 3rd trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him, as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden, that come sunrise Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done, cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around the bend lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. But the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer. My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on." Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. "Is there anyone else in the house with you right now?" "Mr. Anderson?" Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and... Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are?" Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. "Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed, "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. A mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, he believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark," a voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet. I'll stay out of sight. I promise." He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fiber in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway. Terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, you'll let us know immediately, right?" "Of course," Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Who was just here?" Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody. I was just getting some air." Sarah glanced around suspiciously. "Why are you so jumpy, Mark?" He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. "Did you let her sleep? In our bed? In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child?" Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you?" She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling. Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. "Stay away," she said. Her voice choked. "I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me." He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door. 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plain-clothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. "Mr. Anderson," the detective said, voice clipped. "May we come in?" Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. "We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carla Rodriguez," Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. "We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information." Mark's hands shook. I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all." Detective Carter nodded. "She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson?" The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. "I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums." The detective studied Mark's face. "Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct?" Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. "Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home?" Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. "I only just found out." She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. "We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice." Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, "I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help." The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. "Let's go," he said, handing Mark his card. "If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences." As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "I can't do this, Mark," she said. Voice hollow. You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety. He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, "I'm sorry," so many times before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. "I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can." He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, "I need someone I can trust right now." Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her, apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges. But the possibility of an arrest loomed, overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later, the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home, into our bed." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "Just the chance to be a good father, to be better." "I need time," Sarah whispered. "I have to think about what's best for the baby." Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby, unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, "I hate what you did, but I see you're trying." Mark held her hand gently. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her eyes softened. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances.